Greetings and welcome to Office Hours. If you are new here and you want to learn a little bit more about what we do, you can head over to officehours.global. Our first hour, we answer your questions on media and digital productions of all kinds. And our second hour is something that we typically want to spend a little bit more time on. And today we'll be talking about spreadsheets, some of the things that you can do, why you should use them, from numbers to Google Sheets to M365. So get your questions in early, especially if that's a space that you're trying to figure out as well. And if you've got questions and you happen to be watching the replay, you can always head over to askofficehours.global. And speaking of questions, Alexander, let's get into it.
Our first question this morning is from Jasmine Lee in Singapore. Hi, any recommendation for antivirus software for Windows laptops used for show production? They are connected to the internet during the show. Are there any alternatives to software other than reformatting, which I am not able to do? I have 10 laptops.
Alexander.
Well, I don't recommend using anything than what comes with Windows 10 and Windows 11. So Windows Defender is Microsoft's own anti-malware, antivirus solution. And in my experience, that does just fine. I find third-party antivirus, anti-malware tools tend to get their hooks into the system and cause far more problems with chewing up processor resources and memory and causing problems with pro audio and pro video apps in general. I usually have to uninstall them from people's computers. So I do not recommend anything other than just Windows Defender. And in my experience, it's been totally fine.
Jeff?
My feelings on Windows Defender also, and that's only for the systems that we're running actual antivirus on. On most of our stuff, we don't have to. If you properly train people to not do things that are dumb, then you can prevent a lot of problems. Now, granted, if you're shoving in clients' USB keys, sacrifice one computer just to do that with as many antivirus as you want to put on it, and then move that content over after you scan that USB key. I have had the one USB key bring down a system before, just because it had some malware and some bad actors involved with it. But honestly, when it comes down to the Windows side, reformat is always an option, and or replace the hard drive altogether if it's that bad. You should be able to. I don't know of any software anymore that you can't relicense and move. It's a time consuming thing to do. I agree. We just did 12 systems here in the last couple of months, and there are production systems, but I wanted to keep them pristine. And it was 5 years since we probably last did it, so it was well worth the time because now they're running fantastic. And so I highly suggest just take the time.
Next question.
Next question is from Douglas Carmichael. Logic Pro 11 releases today for the Mac. What features are you most excited about?
Alexander.
I had a quick look at the page. I'm assuming that web page is being updated, and that is the feature set for 11. So assuming that is accurate, it looks like, again, Apple, they're very secretive about what they've been working on. There's a lot of predictions about AI tools and all that sort of stuff that's going to be baked into future versions of iOS and possibly Mac OS. So it looks like some of that's now coming to Logic because they appear to have tools that can separate voices and instruments out of the mix. So they actually say on the page there that, take your old demos, your old recordings that weren't very good, and you should be able to pull out these stems from the mix using a lot of this modern technology. So I think that's pretty fascinating, and that's something that I'm actually going to be doing later this year, actually, as I try to restore some really old 2-inch tape. And try to separate all of those instruments from the recording to try to remaster it. So I think the future is really bright for a lot of that stuff. And we saw that with the Beatles being able to take these old John Lennon recordings and being able to pull out the voice and separate it from the rest and remaster it. So I think that's pretty exciting.
Alex?
What's interesting is that a lot of times people look at listing off a huge list of feature upgrades rather than just a handful of things that really work. And this is what Apple tends to be good at. We're going to hand you a couple new things, and they're really cool, and they took a lot of work, and only we can do that. or not we and a handful of people. So if you look at what Logic updated, they focused on a couple things. You want to look at the session artists, the AI tools that now can add I believe, keyboard and bass to your. They've had drums for 10 years, but basically add keyboard and bass that will follow along the rest of your composition, and just simply you have a couple different players to play from. You have potential loops to base it on, but it'll sit there and just kind of play with the music that you give it. This is great for people who don't know all the instruments and can't play them all themselves. If you're trying to build a demo, you're trying to put something together, you're trying to think about it, it allows you to kind of throw that together. And I think that it's a pretty interesting tool. It'll be interesting to see what musicians think of it, especially ones that don't play those instruments, and how easy is it to add to their composition. But it looks like it has enough sliders and enough control to make it unique. But it also does an awful lot automatically. The separation of the tracks is really interesting because Apple really pushes it as a remix tool, which is very interesting because it's got all kinds of copyright issues. This is the closest to rip mix burn, or rip mix burn that Apple had 25 years ago, and touches a little on the crushing ad that had, so there's a lot of artists that are a little upset about some of these separation tracks because then their samples end up getting used somewhere else. Usually they get licensed anyway if they're used in those songs, so it usually gets worked out, but it is something that people get concerned about. There's another service on the iPhone called Moises, and Moises does they've been doing this track separation for quite some time, and their track separation is still more robust than what Apple's doing in Logic. I don't know if Apple did that on purpose or other things, to not Sherlock them completely. But what they do is they'll separate those tracks, and how my daughter uses it. My daughter plays most of those instruments. But she plays specifically when she's doing drums. She has an electronic drum set. And what she'll do is she will strip out, she'll use Moises to strip all the pieces out, particularly the drums. She can play with the drums because she can feed the output into her electronic drum. So she hears her drums playing along with the drums that are what were in the original track. She can then turn those drums off and listen to the track without the drums and play along with the song. It's a very, very powerful tool for learning how to play, something within a song, to really learn it perfectly. And so that's what Moises does. Logic's going to allow you to do that. What's interesting about some of the session artist things as well is that they're designed to work live. So you could literally walk up there and start playing, and it says it's a live tool. It'll be interesting to see how that works, but it's not like it takes a lot of processing. It's using that M1. And I think that the overall takeaway from what Apple's doing right now with their apps is they're using the apps to really take advantage of the M1 to push the envelope of what the iPad can do, what their M1s can do, because I think they've targeted artists as the people that are going to buy a lot of their hardware. And that's been a little bit here or there, but I think that you're going to see a lot of focus on very, very heavy processing upgrades to Final Cut, to Motion, to Logic, because it presses people to buy those, because they're going to give you tools that you can't get anywhere else, and definitely not at the same price.
CJ?
I'm really looking forward to the session musicians feature as well. I've had a Yamaha keyboard for a few years, one of their Clavinovas that'll analyze, because music's really math, and since we're on math today, it analyzes when you're playing different sorts of chords, and this is a minor 7 flat 5, and this is a major 7th, and then it'll make up, depending on the style, you pick a different bass line, a different drum fill. So I'm really excited to hold those up together and see how Apple's approaching it. But, years down the road, as the Logic Pro features start to filter down and trickle down to GarageBand, when you're learning an instrument and you can't get people to put up with your, learning stage, 4 or 5 people you're playing with in a band, having those session musicians is so great just for practice. It's so much more gratifying than a darn metronome.
Yeah, absolutely.
Next question.
From the QR code, we have Marielle Jusha Miera and Wablo. We need a completely license-free copy of Scotland the Brave, Pipes and Drums, for an event to play live and stream. Where can we find it to download and use? Maybe need a similar version of Amazing Grace, too. Thank you.
Alex?
In general, the way we've handled this in the past is that we find artists that are near us and we record it. So we actually bring them to a place where we think is either a recording studio, or it is it's either a recording studio or somewhere that's quiet that we think we're going to get what we need. Bagpipes are a little more challenging because they'll pick up all the reverberance of anything that you have there. But those are, obviously things that there are people everywhere that can play those songs. And it may cost you a couple $100, it won't cost you more than $1,000 to get those things recorded. And so that's what we would probably lean towards, is having, if I needed to be completely free of licensing. Now, you could also look at places like Epidemic Sound. They might have something like that. Things like this that aren't encumbered by copyright. Oftentimes, you may be able to find those. You may want to look at something like Pond 5, although there are still some restrictions on how you use it. So you got to be careful of where you put it. But Epidemic Sound will give you the licensing for YouTube. You have to remember that when you go on YouTube, though, someone may have already played it and claimed it, and whether they have the rights to it or not, they may still hit you up with it. You may still get nailed by the YouTube eye. So you have to be kind of careful of all of those things. So whatever you do, you're going to have to play it in, because it's looking at those notes. It's not looking at the pure recording. And so those are things to kind of consider there. You may also look for, if you're looking for something that's just pretty good and not necessarily as authentic, another thing you can think about is you can find these tracks as MIDI tracks. You can find almost anything in the world as a MIDI track. I was kind of amazed at what you can find there. And you can load those MIDI tracks in, give them the instruments. It's going to sound okay. I mean, it depends on what level that you're trying to use it at, but that'll be copyright, not encumbered by copyright. Those are old enough songs that you're not going to have that problem. But again, remember that if you're going to stream it to something like YouTube, you're going to have to play it in and have it analyze it and tell you whether someone else is going to make a claim on it.
And just pulling in some of the comments, Mickey shares that I would avoid license free, as there's rarely anything that is truly free. And he includes Audio Network or Universal Production Music. That is a source that he uses by a long shot. And then Rion said licked, lickd.co. So a couple resources for you there. Next question.
Next question is from John Foltz in Selinsgrove, Pennsylvania. When not using in-ear monitors, how do panelists monitor their computer sound? Do you use audio interfaces, direct connect speakers, Airplay?
Alexander?
Yeah, so when I'm not using in-ear monitors for this type of show, generally I like to mix on good quality over-the-ear headphones. So these are my Audio-Technica R70X. They're an open back headphones. I love these headphones. I also have studio monitors, so when I don't want to use headphones or I need to check the mix, because I always check on studio monitors for anything that I do, whether it's video production or anything more critical if it's music production. So studio monitors are what I use, and yes, that goes into an audio interface of some kind.
Jeff?
Being an old audio guy, I have a lot of different choices to choose from. When it comes to monitoring, besides I can't stand these in-ears for long-term monitoring, so I use them on the show, and that's about it, because they're just not as clear. They move in and out of my ears. I guess it's the size of my ears. Dante, going into these comms, or how are you? Because I can get a stereo feed into both ears at that, left, dedicated left and dedicated right. Hear the stereo imaging. If it's in the center, it's just a mono comm thing. I know where it is. But the biggest thing on my desk, JBL 6208s. It's got an 8-inch woofer, it's a beautiful tweeter, and a perfect image in the middle of those two speakers. And they're probably 15 years old or more now, and I just turn them up and crank them up.
And Alex?
Yeah, it really depends. At home, of course, at work, we've got a couple different systems that we use. At home, I have this very old Roland, like it's a big box. I was looking for it. I don't know what the model number is, but it's got like 4 inputs, and I can kind of tweak those inputs and everything else. It's just a mono box that sits over there. If I'm listening to something and want to hear it specifically, I'm going to use. I have an Audio-Technica M50X that I listen to over the ears if I'm really analyzing something. They're not incredibly expensive. I think they're a couple $100 or something like that. But they're very. I find them. I know what they sound like. Like that's always the thing. Is like I know what that means when I'm listening to it. I will say 80% of the time I am listening to in-ears. I have these on. So if I'm not critically listening, I tend to throw them on in all my meetings. But that's what I listen to there. When I'm listening to music, I I have to admit, I'm usually listening to my AirPod Pros, or AirPod Maxes. It's not. I find them to be there's a variety of parts of it that I find not to be as good, but they're good enough for most of my walking around, listening to music and doing things.
Next question.
Next question is from the QR code, Callum McCorkle in Bournemouth leads. For the CME, our organization has escalated to level G in our emergency preparations handbook since F may not be enough. Should we look at moving on to the next level preparation? What would that need?
Alex?
I think this was asked last week and just didn't quite make it until today. So we made it. We made it to the other side of the CME. We saw some of us saw my son took some pictures of some bright lights. There was a couple things to see there. There's nothing to do as an organization, to be honest with you. I mean, other than evacuation, if something actually happened. There's not the amount of damage that would happen if a CME actually reached Carrington level, which this one did not. There's not a lot to do other than stay home and have a lot of dry goods. So it's I think people get caught up in trying to prepare for something, but this is a natural disaster that you can't prepare for, really. I mean, as a person, you can prepare for it by understanding how you can cook food, having dry goods for a long period of time, understanding the basics of what you would do without power for months. The stuff that if you read into the stuff, and we have 2 more years of the high season, and then after that it'll be another decade of probably not having to worry about it. But if it actually happened at that level, if a coronal mass ejection went at that level, you may have to be prepared to not have anything in your area have power for months. So just think about what that would look like and think about how you prepare for that.
Alexander?
I'm curious, but if the entire, because I don't know enough about how these actually work, but if the entire office hours community, if we all pitched in and bought an underground abandoned missile silo, would that protect us? Would that? I'm seriously.
It would. You definitely have more. I don't know if it protects you perfectly from it, but it'd probably do a pretty good job. All that rebar would definitely, being underground. I wanted a missile silo since I was like 10 years old, and every time I see one come up, they get more expensive now because people have figured out what to do with them. But they used to be like $75,000, $150,000, and if I had $150,000 in cash in the bank. When I saw a missile silo, I would 100% bought it. I would burrow into the ground in a heartbeat. So it's not really, I would use CME preparedness as the excuse. But man, that's a lot of infrastructure that was spent to go into the ground. I mean, you're talking about $150,000 for millions and millions of dollars of infrastructure. I don't know. Yeah, it's hard to get them now. But there was a while where they were decommissioning them in the 80s and 90s, and you could get a missile silo for, nothing.
So CME, care medical emergency?
Yeah, it's a coronal mass ejection. So what happens is that 2 sunspots get close enough together that they build an arc between them. And so there's a lot of data. And what happens is eventually, think of it as like it's a band of energy. And when that arc breaks, it fires off pieces of it. Just think of that pieces of that. I'm simplifying it, but pieces of that come flying off from the sun. Most of the time, that CME goes somewhere not towards the Earth. So it only gets exciting when it actually and what happens is the sunspots get busy and then not busy. So they about every 10 to 12 years, they say 11 years, but it's really every 10 to 12 years it goes up and down. So we're in the high activity, and so when you have a lot of sunspots, you get these arcs, and those arcs because there's a lot of them around each other, and they get close enough to start passing. You got to get the arc, by the way, between the sunspots. I think we were talking to an expert. You could fit 5 or 6 Earths between the sun's surface and the top of the arc, like to kind of give you a sense of how big these arcs are. And if they fire off, the Carrington event that happened, which everyone talks about, is the only one we've ever had at that level since we had wires. And the stories are that it took out the telegraph system. And that was when we only had telegraphs. And there's some stories of telegraph offices catching fire. I'm not sure if that's, we don't know whether that's true or not. But there's a lot of, when you see those CMEs, we're talking a lot about the pretty lights, and I think that keeps everybody focused on the pretty lights. But there's a lot of government. You don't have to go very far. You don't have to look at conspiracy theorists. Download. There are reports from NASA, reports from a variety of government agencies talking about how stressed they are about this one thing. Like this is something that they can't stop. when they hit it, when you talk to people who manage risk in DC, they don't talk about a couple people dying. If we get a quarantine event, they're talking a lot. So and it's not because of the CME itself. It's because all the services suddenly stop, and suddenly you have a bunch of people in the city with enough food for 1 week, and you're not going to be able to get them food for 3 months. And you can think about how that would turn out. So that's the challenge of coronal mass ejections. It's why a lot of people pay a lot of attention to it. But again, don't read the conspiracy theorists or anything else. Go straight to NASA. Go straight to the government agencies. There are papers on it that will outline their concerns in detail.
Next question.
Next question is from Mike Edwards in Brooklyn, New York. Morning, everyone. I want to connect via USB 3.2 directly to my Synology NAS RS822RP+ from about 200 feet away. What method does the panel recommend connecting with so that I can get the best transfer speeds?
Alexander?
Yeah, so that's a really long distance. And if you can't move that thing closer to you, you're really looking at fiber, basically. So Corning makes these really nice USB fiber optic cables. They also make Thunderbolt cables as well, and incredible lengths. We're talking, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of feet. They're very expensive, so you could easily, for that distance, I don't know what they charge. I've looked at it in the past, but you could easily pay anywhere from $500 to $1,000 just for a cable like that.
Jeff?
No USB on a NAS. That is only to set it up. Disconnect it immediately. It's a NAS, network attached storage. So get it on your network and leave it on the network. It has 4 gigabit NICs on it already. So you can lag those together, which means you combine the output of each one of those, and you'll get more speed than a USB 3. Eventually, stick a 10 gig card in it and run everything over a 10 gig and make sure your infrastructure supports that. Of course, your switches need to support 10 gig and your computer needs to support 10 gig also. If you only have USB on, say if you're using a Mac or something that only has USB on it, you have to go Thunderbolt into a dock and then 10 gig from that point. But if you're using a PC that has a card slot available, put a 10 gig in there. That could be 10 gig in copper, or if you really need to go with more reliability, I would do fiber for that reason. It's just less likely to have any kind of noise or any kind of EMI or RFI interference.
So Jeff, Mickey says in the comments, get a DAS, not a NAS. Is that what you just described?
I think he might be thinking DAC. Is it DAC?
He put DAS, but potentially.
Okay, a desktop attached storage. So basically move it to a desktop if your only option was literally to have just a USB. But still, the speed on USB is going to be, you're losing all the capabilities of having a NAS, a network attached storage, meaning multiple machines can talk to it, multiple machines can pull from it, multiple machines can write to it. That's the whole point of having a NAS.
And Alex.
And if you're looking for the industry level connection to with USB. So I do agree that if you have a NAS, then you should connect it over the network. But if you are looking for a USB connection, the one that we use the most for like installations is this. This is IHSE. This is the company that does all of the really high end stuff that we use for some of our productions. They have a variety of different tools. One of the nice things is that you can get a box and you can say, well, I want RS-232 and a USB and a thing and a thing and a thing. And then you plug it into a fiber and it sends all of those things, and it has another box that matches it that pops them all out the other side. And so we use things. This is like a common thing if you want to connect IHS. Where we got into using them was when we needed to connect EVSs that were a long way away from where we were, and we needed to be able to have RS-232 get past them from what is stupid. Anyway, but how do we do that? We got into that research, and we ended up with these, and they have a whole, it's just everything you could imagine of extending a signal from one place to another over fiber.
Next question.
Alton Christensen, San Francisco, California asks, a wireless camera lost signal during the last song of Eurovision. Given the production's tight scripting and event triggers, how do they prepare for this? It wasn't very elegant.
Alex.
Yeah, let's see if I can pop this up here. Let's see if we can. Let's see if he's got just the right. Let's see. So we've got these moving here. Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't give you the. Oh, and it broke. There you go. And they cut away, and that's how you prepare for it. You have another camera. So what you saw there was enough time for the TD or the director to realize that the camera had frozen, and they moved on to another angle. And it is a little bit difficult. Eurovision is very scripted, so the way that they prep those songs is completely scripted. Like, so the artist, everyone is going to be where they need to be. So that's something they can do. But it does, what you saw there was the length of time it took them to realize that it was frozen, wasn't coming back. They went to another angle, and that's what you can do. As far as, wireless is it's a complicated thing, especially because you can prep everything and work on everything there. But you have people there's a lot of things that change when all the people come into the room and everything else. Typically what I would do in those environments where I have a mission critical camera is my receiver would be right next to my receiver. I keep the distance between the receiver and the transmitter as low as possible. So I don't know where they put those receivers, but my receivers would be probably up high and right out of camera, as close to me in camera shots as possible. Once we look at the whole thing is to keep them very, very close. And most of those are, these are going to be things like BizLink. I don't know if that was a BizLink or not, but very high end camera systems to do those things. Eurovision's a spare no expense, but even then, the Super Bowl a couple years ago, a decade ago or 2 decades ago, lost power in half the stadium. These things happen. But it's very rare. And one of the ways that you manage it is you have the least number. You only do wireless when you absolutely have to.
Jeff?
Well, I'm just going to offer an alternative view, considering that, yes, this Eurovision stuff is absolutely scripted. All those cuts, it's not some magic guy going to the beat. It's using QPilot. And QPilot is a rundown and orchestration service that allows you to slave your actual switcher to the audio track. So you plan out in a timeline type view what cameras you're going to go to, and they rehearse a lot. And so in this situation, when it dropped out, that camera probably was only going to be on for like 4 or 5 seconds at most. I think that the drop was maybe 3 seconds. So at that point in time, the TD was probably sitting back, I don't know, sipping on cappuccino or something. And then all of a sudden, oh, wait, it froze. Let me grab it. That's the period of time it took to go to another camera. But yeah, the best solution to make it work is either one, redundant signals, which I've actually done before, is have 2 wirelesses on a camera if it's really that important to be wireless. Have 2 wirelesses on a camera, and they're both of different manufacturers or different frequency ranges, and then you have redundant paths going back for that matter. But as the newer wirelesses like the VizLink and our DJIs that we're using now, it's less and less of a problem. But if it's wireless, I'm always thinking it's going to break.
And Alex?
Yeah, wireless is always the thing. The other thing you can do is run it through a TVIPS. This is a very small little box that will compare the signals back and forth. And if one appears to freeze, it'll immediately switch over. And usually it would do it faster than that. But you wouldn't normally put it into a whole bunch of, they may use one of these in the future. We use it for satellite transmission. So we got 2 satellites coming back. We will time them and run them through a TVIPS. And what it'll do is it'll be looking at those signals. And if one drops out, it'll pop over to the other one in a couple frames. Like I said, we set the how quickly it'll jump, but it'll jump over to another one very, very quickly. So you could do something like that with the wireless, but that would be then that becomes your single point of failure, your SPOF. There's always something, you're just kind of moving single points of failure around, and so you have to be kind of careful of that as well.
Next question.
John Foltz in Ceilings Grove, Pennsylvania asks, which of online storage systems do panelists like best? iCloud, MS OneDrive, Google Drive, others?
CJ?
I've used all of them. I've got to say, iCloud Drive has got to be one of my favorites for my personal use, just because any working files that I have, whether it's on the desktop or in a documents folder, do a really good job of syncing, and I can get at them no matter if I don't have to have an app downloaded. I just open my phone and it works. I've tried to replicate that same experience with Microsoft OneDrive, with Dropbox, with Google Drive, and I haven't had the same results. I don't like putting their apps onto my computer. It seems to make it slow down. It needs to reindex all the time, takes a lot of processing power. But I'm working with files that are megabytes, not gigabytes and terabytes, so that would be my caveat.
Alexander?
I used to use Dropbox many, many years ago, and I loved it when it first came out. And then at some point, and I can't pinpoint what year, but the client app got progressively worse and worse, and it was chewing up more and more system resources, and I just got fed up with it. And I switched to iCloud Drive because I'm all in the Apple ecosystem. So I suppose the answer depends on what are you doing, what kind of computers you have. And if you're primarily Mac, iCloud Drive is great. I switched to iCloud Drive when Apple added the ability to share individual files and put permissions on it like Dropbox, because that was the thing that I was really, really missing. So now I can do that. I don't store anything mission critical or massive files in iCloud Drive, but all my documents, small little audio files, I put in there, graphics assets, all that sort of stuff. And it works really, really well. I've got an iCloud family plan that I share with my entire family, and that works really well. And it's been rock solid for me.
Ryan?
CJ made a great point about there being kind of a difference in which application you select based on whether we're talking about a personal context or an enterprise context. Another one that hasn't been mentioned is Box. And so that's one that's always been a little bit more organized around the enterprise. But I certainly lean towards the Microsoft ecosystem, which includes kind of an option called OneDrive for more of the files that are by default private that you do have the ability to share on a one-off basis with a group or with an individual on your team. And then SharePoint, which is by default shared with a group, but that can be tightened down from a restricted sharing perspective when necessary.
And Jeff?
I think I'll go back to the question itself. Is like, what type of files? That's a bigger issue. To me, if it's a lot of small stuff, it's one thing. But if it's really big video files and such, that's going to also factor into what the cost is going to be for transporting that content up and down. For us, for production, we use S3 buckets on AWS because we're already doing production in the cloud. So it makes sense to have the sources right there also. Whenever it's offline stuff, we're bringing it down to our own NAS that's in our network. And we have ways of getting that for clients also. If it's some long-term footage that we need to be able to share, we share it directly off of that NAS in a secure fashion. I try to stay away from most of the commercial places, like have been mentioned, especially OneDrive. OneDrive is the death of our production systems. Whenever you have a OneDrive or a Google Drive, if you have the extra software installed on a production system that's sitting there having to resync, OneDrive is also trying to do that. It can bring down a video production system fairly easy, and I just prefer to stay away from those things and use tools that are a little bit more manageable.
I co-sign with Mickey in the comments with Frame.io. So yes, we use Google Drive, but we've been using Frame.io more so, especially for client projects and for just archiving certain elements virtually, in addition to our storage units that are standard, or I should say physical storage tools. Alex?
And David Brady also mentions the Sony Cinema Cloud, Aspera Accelerated, which is a pretty high-end solution to make that actually work. I use Frame.io for everything. We're actually interviewing Emery Wells next week, tomorrow afternoon at 1:30. So we'll be talking about version 4 and just his whole process of getting there. So I just want to, there's no sponsorship or anything else. I'm just letting you know that we are talking to Emery, and you'll get one chance to ask him questions. So 1:30 Pacific Standard Time tomorrow. I use Frame.io for everything that is production related. If you really want to have something that's up there for a long time, you can also think about Backblaze. You can also think about Glacier. There are a couple things that are low cost, keep everything up there kind of backups. For production, I use Frame.io. And I will tell you that people in production make a bunch of decisions about folks based on what they share. If you share with a production client something from iCloud, OneDrive, Google Drive, Dropbox, they're going to make a decision that you are a certain tier of production. Frame.io gets you into that middle tier where almost everybody exists. And if you send them Aspera links, they assume you work for a big company. Those are the kind of the things. But Frame.io in the industry is an extremely common thing that we see. And what I do is I tend to move a lot of my stuff into there's an archive storage, which is not very expensive. So as I finish projects, one of the things important frame is that I create new folders for new projects for everything that I do. I don't put them all into a folder and then have them all inside that folder, because the problem that I get into is then it's harder to archive. So what I do is I have them all in their own archive, and as I finish that project, I put them into archive. It takes 4 hours to get them back, and so but it's much less expensive to keep them there. And so I have terabytes of data. And what's great is when a client says, "Hey, can you give me something that we did a year and a half ago?" And you go, "Oh yeah," and then later that afternoon you hand it to them, or the next morning, and being able to very quickly find that without having to look for it makes you look pretty good. so it's and again that archive storage is much less expensive to keep.
Next question.
Guy Cochran in Seattle asks, can you explain this NHL cloud production diagram like I'm 5? And there's a very complex graphic there.
Thank you, Guy. Jeff?
It's not that hard, Guy. And I know you definitely understand more about it than most people. Like you're 5. Okay, so the video, audio, and all that is collected on site. Then it goes through unicorns and rainbows and fairy dust up to the cloud. That's the important part, because it's being transferred over to the cloud, and then it's transferred again in the cloud, and then it's separated again in the cloud, and then it finally ends up getting mixed up and pushed out the other side. It is a lot more complicated in that workflow than what it should have been. Let me put it that way. They could have done better things, but broadcast people are sometimes snobs, and I admit I every once in a while could get that away too. There are ways that you could do this a lot more cost effectively. They were using JPEG XS going up and then flipping it over to CDI in the cloud, using AWS's tools, and then ended up in NDI with Sienna processing engine tools that we use. And then it was NDI also inside of VisVector and also Dreamcatcher, and which is a compressed format. It's not the holy grail as some broadcasters feel like it needs to be all uncompressed. But that's the workflow it ended up being. And then there was some conversion on the backside of that too. But yeah, it's honestly, when you really break it down to the pieces, it's just getting this packet, this little bit of video, this little bit of audio up to the cloud, and then split out from there, and then spit out some more to somewhere else to go to somebody's handheld.
Next question.
Douglas Carmichael asks, in the NHL cloud production diagram Guy shared, they are transporting Dante over VPN. Isn't the guideline to keep Dante on a local network?
Go ahead, Jeff.
Not if you're using Dante Connect. That's the whole point it exists, is to do Dante over a wide area network. And I actually have a friend of mine that would love to share with some more of that. He is the product manager of Dante Connect, and we would love to have him on the show, because he is really smart and really knowledgeable about what makes this work. They are using, it wasn't quote a VPN, it was AWS Direct Connect, which is kind of like a VPN, but it's not really truly just, an off-the-shelf VPN. But it's using that method to get up. It's uncompressed. It is going full audio quality all the way up. It's not a special mezzanine codec or anything like that. Goes up to the cloud, and then it's converted and moved around in the cloud using multicast that's on those individual machines that have a very special version of Dante Virtual Sound Card installed on them.
Next question.
Next question's from Georgios Papadopoulos in Nicosia. Any ideas for wireless video transfer from a Steadicam to video switcher, at least 422, 10-bit broadcast quality, low lat? Control the colors and settings of the camera, Sony, iris/zoom, etc. from control room. Multiple antennas. Thank you.
Alex?
There's a lot to unpack there. Some of the stuff is relatively straightforward to do. Some of it is not. So when you're talking about the color, 10-bit, 422, those types of things, many things will do it. The TerraDeck will definitely be your kind of entry level. I don't think the Hollyland will necessarily do 10-bit, but a lot of the TerraDeck products will do a 10-bit signal. So that's probably your entry level position for just transferring the video back. When it starts talking about camera control, usually we're separating out iris, or we're separating out zoom from camera paint functions. And so camera color, iris, so on and so forth can be sent there. It's a little more complicated to send those. Now, this is what we used at, we didn't have to do some of those controls for this, but this is the kind of thing that you would see. This is right here, you can see this is a VisLink transmitter, but it will also receive camera control from remotely. And so, but this transmitter itself, or this system, is about $50,000. so like it's an expensive piece of hardware from VisLink, but it will carry that information back and forth. I do believe we're going to bring them on to talk about it a little bit more, but I do believe it'll send lens controls as well. But I know that it'll do paint functions back to the Sony camera specifically.
Jeff?
The whole iris zoom part was the one. Iris, okay, I get that paint shading, racking if you're overseas, but zoom, a little different. Multiple antennas, that's almost a given when you're talking about a really true high-level broadcast solution. As I mentioned a couple questions ago, we're using the new DJI, and it has been really, really rock solid. It is a single path, though. It's not a dual path like the VisLink was. So I would suggest kind of qualifying exactly what you need and maybe even break that up a little bit. We also use a great product. Scorhoy is one of our paint products that we use, or shading devices, and we're actually sending that over to our cameras, which can be painted by network. And so we actually send that over a managed 2.4 or 5.8 gigahertz access point effectively. But it's our management, it's our signal, it's our, we're taking care of everything on that. And then at that point, it is converted back into the camera. The camera is seen as just another IP device on our network. And so we can paint, shade it. And at that point, we actually can control the zoom for a few couple cameras. But getting zoom control usually means you're going to need to interface with a device that allows you to do that conversion of, because you're usually doing a rotary motor, a servo that's moving the zoom itself, and that can be sometimes a little bit hard to manage. That nucleus or some of those you could do over 900 megahertz or 2.4. I'm not sure exactly what they work in exactly, but they have different frequencies you could run simultaneously. You end up using a lot of different solutions to get where you're going, though. I don't think it exists in a single solution yet.
Alex?
Yeah, and one thing you want to be careful of as you start to, if you're doing a Steadicam, then we're going to assume your budget's going a little bit bigger, and a lot of the smaller wireless, the 2.85, 5 gigahertz type things, are not going to probably be something you want to use in production. Those are great for home projects. But I think that the zoom is something that a lot of Steadicam operators may not be as accustomed to when you do that, because most of them are working in film, and film very rarely uses zooms. And so, focus is something that, a follow focus is something that people will pay attention to, but zoom is not something. And oftentimes, if that's the case, you may end up giving the Steadicam operator something that they can manage on their own. But I just don't think, they're just not used to using zooms very often, because usually they zoom with their feet. And that's how a Steadicam operator usually does zooming, is not with pedals. They just walk in, and then they walk back, and that's how they affect their framing. And if you ask my brother, who is a Steadicam operator, he's on a film right now. That's what he'll tell you. He'll shuffle his feet and say, "I use my feet for zoom." so anyway.
And Jeff,
just to follow up. My little hobby of using that DJI was for a broadcast that was a worldwide feed to ATP Media. So I used it on a broadcast, a real TV broadcast that went worldwide, and it worked very, very well. Much, much better than any TerraDeck I ever put my hands on. And so that's one reason.
No, the DJI, and I would make an exception. I'm saying there's a lot of things that are focused on that. I'm not talking about the DJI.
So Hollyland, for instance.
Yeah, the Hollyland has a lot more latency, and it breaks up pretty quickly. It's very inexpensive, but you got to decide what you're doing. For what Hollyland's really good for, I think, is for sending a director a camera tap. It's not very expensive. You don't worry about it much. They can look at it. But TerraDeck has a lot of other good ones there as well, and so does DJI. But I will say that as generally what we see as the consequences stack up, you tend to start spending more on transmitters. Okay,
Next question.
There you go.
Next question is from Francis Fry in Cambridge, Massachusetts. I have connected the HyperDeck Studio 4K Pro to my Mac and want to edit the SSD cards without removing them. This works with the MultiDock 10G, but I can't figure out how to see the SSD cards from the HyperDeck on my Mac. Advice.
Alex?
You can FTP to pull something over. I wouldn't edit off of a HyperDeck. Like, that's just not what it's built for. So you can FTP to pull files off of your HyperDeck, but I wouldn't be editing off of it. And I will say the MultiDock is great because what you can do is you can edit off of it. And so what you do is you pull those SSDs out of your HyperDeck, you plug them into the MultiDock, and then you can edit away. And if you can actually use multiple MultiDocks if you really want to.
Next question.
Next question comes from Karen Addison, Melbourne, Australia. Watching ColourLab interview, he was able to magnify where his mouse was to be able to read the small writing. How do you do that? Reference YouTube timeline 26 minutes, 51 seconds. Alex?
I meant to get this up, and I don't have a good way to show it really quickly, but this is an accessibility, I believe. It's an accessibility thing that's on the Mac. So he's just using, this is a Mac function. There is a mouse Jose, which I believe is actually made by Boink Software, which makes Memo Live. That also has, I believe it's that does some of these tools around it as well. But some of the basic zooming tools can be done inside of the Mac itself.
And CJ?
Sorry about that. I was getting prepped for the second hour, and I missed this. This is one of my favorite things to do on the Mac. So what you do is under accessibility, it's under the setting for zoom. And so for zoom, you say use scroll gesture with modifier keys to zoom, and then you say modifier key scroll gesture. I like control, and you just hold down control and zoom in and out, and you're good to go. Another one that I like is to use keyboard shortcuts for zoom, and this lets you use command option 8, equal, and minus for in, out, and then the 8 ends up becoming a punch in. And if you have a Stream Deck Plus, you can have this be the button push. This is clockwise, this is counterclockwise, and now you have a little dial. Anywho, that's me.
And I just want to say that it is Mouse Pose, and this is what it looks like here. And I'm pretty sure that's what was actually being used here. And this is by Boink Software. So if you're really interested in that, check that out.
And if you enjoyed those quick demos, stay tuned for the second hour when we'll be talking about spreadsheets. So get your questions in early. And remember you get the chance. This show is driven by you. So vote those questions up that you want us to answer first. Next question.
Guy Cochran from Seattle asks, what reasonably priced desktop control panel would you recommend for vMix local cloud switching?
Jeff?
Well, that's kind of a loaded question, Guy. Just a little bit. Define reasonably. That's the big question, right? So some people, they feel like a $200 or $250, whatever the XL Stream Deck is, they feel like that's too much. But for real buttons, and I say that, and I think there's other people on the panel that agree with me that Stream Deck buttons don't feel the same as an NKK type button. This is a good copy. This is the TIST video. This is a smaller unit. They have a larger unit. Well, they actually have an even smaller unit than this too. And the larger unit is like a 2ME type. And so it's got more buttons, more things to assign. The TIS, along with Joe DeMax's central control, is the way that we control a lot of vMix and also a lot of TriCaster / BizVectors in the cloud. It is a proven great piece of gear. This unit, I think, is around $400 or $500 now, not out of reach for different control surfaces. You also can use the central control platform with older new tech devices, which I actually have three now, sitting over there next to my wall that I have them lined up, that we are doing everything from the 2-stripe to the 850 CS. Any of these old control surfaces can work with central control. So start with central control and then find something that fits your budget of controlling your designated software that you want to.
Next question.
Next question is from Paul Wallace in Austin, Texas. Netflix, Amazon, and Apple plan big changes to Hollywood's pay model. Apple's Hollywood Studio and the others will begin basing pay on how a series or movie performs. Comment.
Alexander?
Not entirely clear if we're talking about actors getting paid or paying the people that have come up with the idea for the show or had written it. Either way, my perspective is that I'm not super enthused about this. I think people should be paid what they're worth, not based on how successful it is. And I think there's going to be a lot of backlash and problems with this.
Ryan?
What I read was that this had to do originally with the fact that these streaming services didn't want to have to be transparent about the performance of the content that they were putting out, and that now they're willing to kind of open up that aperture and be a little bit more transparent. And as a result, they can shift to a model that is a little bit more of a variable compensation where everybody's got skin in the game relative to the performance of a piece of content.
And Alex?
Yeah, there's base salaries that are being paid no matter what. So people are getting paid for it. What was happening is that there's a base salary, and that's what all people were getting paid. So whatever you agreed to, regardless of how it performed, you just got paid for the day. You got paid for the project. Now you might get paid a lot. You might get, if you're an actor, you might get millions of dollars. But we're really affected folks. I mean, the large actors have leverage to get paid millions of dollars to go, and it doesn't really matter to them whether it works out. But the smaller actors, smaller speaking roles specifically, your non-extra, performance actors often are doing only a handful of projects a year, and they are hoping to get residuals out of those things. And those residuals were not available from the streaming companies, and that's why there's, that's why there was a strike. It was not about the big actors; it was all about all the smaller actors that you see that take the change from someone at a store and say a couple words or do a couple things here, and how do they get paid? And so that's what's happening here. There's a couple things that we see going on. Number one is there's a massive shift in how many. Apple is not changing anything really, because Apple wasn't producing that many pieces anyway. They are, and they're not as cost sensitive as everybody else is. What we are seeing in both, in Netflix is hiring so many people right now for live. Like it is. You see the announcements over every day of these things going out. Netflix is ramping up live. And Amazon has already been doing live. Apple's looking at live. Live is the new reality TV. So what's happening is you're seeing a whole bunch. Number one is you're seeing production dropping dramatically, and not by a little, but by 30% or more. And in some cases more than that. So you're seeing production dropping. Now they were already oversubscribed, so they were already making more content than they needed. This turned it a little harder, and so now they're dropping a lot more production than they were before. They're moving heavily towards documentary, heavily towards live, heavily towards unscripted and without actors. And so it's not that they're not going to produce narrative content with actors and writers, but they're going to produce, depending on who you talk to, somewhere between it'll drop somewhere between 30 and 60% from where it was a couple of years ago. So that's what's going to happen. So I don't know. The people who get into those productions are going to do better, but there's going to be a lot of people that get left out of that process. A lot of it also, because of the cost sensitivity, is moving out of LA. So Atlanta, or Georgia specifically, Louisiana, New Mexico, Canada, those are big winners from what's happening right now. There a lot of productions are quote unquote runaway, and that's accelerated since the strikes. So it'll be interesting to see how it all pans out, but it does look like the strikes have made a big effect. Maybe not always all of the things that were intended, but it's definitely affected the behavior. And again, the people who make it in will do well. But there'll be probably more people that have to wait tables.
Next question.
Rion Smith in Trinidad, West Indies asks, this link speaks to the cool stuff at Intuit Dome, home of the LA Clippers. And there's a Facebook link there.
Alex?
It looks cool. A lot of times when the tech companies take over a space, oftentimes when the owner and I believe this is Paul Allen is the owner of this. Is it not? It's not Paul Allen. It's another Microsoft person. Anyway, when they take over, of course, they want to throw all the tech in. They're like, hey, let's put all this tech. You've seen this. Golden One Center is very high tech because someone from Qualcomm owns a big chunk of the team. You've seen a lot of other folks that are there. So it makes it more fun to be there. And so there's a lot of shiny objects to keep everybody happy while they're doing stuff. So the screens are, I think they said on that, I was only able to scan that because it came in during the show, or I was before the show, but after I looked at it, and it looks like an acre of LED walls, is what they said. So it's a lot of data.
Next question.
Next question is from Paul Wallace in Austin, Texas. Should you get the Lewitt Connect 2? YouTuber Dark Channel Studio says the scroll wheel has a fatal flaw. Comment.
CJ?
So I took a look at the video, Paul. What he's lamenting is that it doesn't have an actual wheel that moves. There's not an encoder. It's a capacitive touch wheel, much like the iPods used to be, but after they had the one that turned in a circle. But everybody's mileage varies with those, so I would get it. If you can use it and like it, keep it. Otherwise, send her back. But there's no way of knowing how a capacitive system is going to work unless you really touch it.
Alexander?
Well, hot take. A single YouTuber said that this is a fatal flaw, so clearly it must be true. The product just came out. Almost nobody has used it yet, so there's no way to predict how reliable that's going to be. So I'll just say that. Lewitt generally makes very good products. Let's wait 12 months until, they've sold thousands of these, and we'll see what happens.
Next question.
Hazmat Gajar in Cape Town, South Africa asked, my 2 ATEM Extreme video outs are both in use in my workflow. I need to send program view to talent. How? I have another ATEM Extreme and Pro Mini. How can they help?
Alexander?
Well, that's one way to do it. I mean, if you have multiple ATEMs, daisy chain them all together. What I do, and this is just one suggestion, somebody else may have another, but I use an HDMI matrix. So I have a 4x4 matrix, and I take both HDMI outputs out of my ATEM. One of them is set to multi-view, one of them is set to program. That goes into my matrix. So I have that way I can actually split those signals. So I have a 50-inch screen here in my living room, and I'll frequently have program on that for when I have guests sitting on the couch if they need to look at somebody on Zoom. So that's one signal, and then I have another monitor where I have another program, a copy of that program signal going there, and then a multi-view copy going somewhere else. So HDMI matrices in this example here can be super handy to do that.
And Alex?
You got a couple options, but the main thing is if one of those outputs is programmed, then you can run it exactly what Alex said. I have an 8x8 matrix. He has a 4x4 matrix. You can get a 2x2 matrix. You can get a splitter that'll just split it out for you. The splitter would be kind of like a Band-Aid. The matrix would be a bigger thing. Eventually, as you start to do more and more of these services, what you'll move to is SDI. So you'll get an SDI Extreme ISO, or you'll get an SDI. If you're staying inside of the Blackmagic environment. Of course, Blackmagic is starting to do 2110. And if you were using other pieces of software, NDI would be another option that sends everything to wherever you want it to go. But inside the Blackmagic software, the Extreme is the HDMI. You're going to go into a matrix. If you have an SDI version, you might get something like the 12x12 clean switch is a nice little one, 20x20 router, or you get one of the 2MEs that they have, and you'll have a bunch of outputs that you can use for that. So there's a bunch of different options there, but you are starting to get into production where this is why we all have routers, is so that we can take one output and put it on 2, 3, 4, 5, 8 outputs, because we've got to put it in a bunch of other places, and so that's where you're kind of getting yourself into.
Next question.
Paul Walhus is back from Austin, Texas. Tim Cook can't run Apple forever. Who's next? John Ternus, the head of hardware engineering, is emerging as a potential successor to the CEO. What kind of leader does Apple need?
Alex?
I don't think Tim Cook's leaving anytime soon. So I think that the guesses would be, I bet you he's got another decade in him. I don't think that he's got anything else he plans to do. And so I don't think I don't think there's that much risk for them. I think that trying to guess now would be pretty hard.
We've got a great week lined up for you here on Office Hours. Tomorrow, we'll be speaking with the Photoshop master, digital artist Bert Monroy, and he's actually inducted even into the Photoshop Hall of Fame in 2004, so you want to stay tuned for that if you are all things graphics. Then on Wednesday, we'll be speaking with Bill Wax, who has been in the radio space industry for 50 years, and he's formerly the program director at SiriusXM and for the channel BB King's Blues channel. So stay tuned for that. On Tuesday, if you're looking and trying to figure out what kind of lens to use, you want to be there for that as well. And Friday will be our catch-all for all things brainstorming for production. So go to officehours.global to see the rest of the schedule for the week. Let's talk spreadsheets.